Every city has corners people walk past without thinking, places where strangers cross paths, glance once, and disappear forever. But sometimes, quietly, without warning, one corner holds a story that changes everything. Every morning in Manhattan, as the city wakes and rushes forward, a girl in a yellow coat stands in the same spot. She doesn't speak. She doesn't wave. She simply smiles. And for one passerby, that smile becomes the calm in the chaos, the one moment that makes the day feel lighter. What begins as a simple noticing slowly becomes something deeper. A connection formed not through words, but through presence. Through waiting. Through the courage it takes to be seen when your heart is still healing. Because the girl in the yellow coat isn't just waiting for love, she's waiting for closure, for forgiveness, for a past she isn't ready to release. This is a story about ordinary mornings and extraordinary emotions, about how love sometimes finds us while we are standing still, and how the bravest thing we can do is stop waiting and step forward. Welcome to The Girl in the Yellow Coat. Every morning at exactly 8:17 a.m., Daniel Mercer stepped off the downtown 6 train at 77th Street and Lexington Avenue, joined the river of commuters spilling up from the underground like clockwork souls released from a mechanical heart. The city greeted him the same way it always did, horns blaring, steam rising from subway grates, the sharp scent of roasted nuts from the cart on the corner, and the low hum of Manhattan waking fully into itself. Daniel liked routines. He trusted them. After 7 years of living in New York, routine was the one thing that made the city feel manageable instead of overwhelming. Same train. Same street corner. Same coffee from the bodega across the avenue, medium, 1 sugar, splash of milk. Same walk to his office 4 blocks west. But 3 months ago, something changed. She appeared one Monday morning in late October, when the air had just begun to bite and leaves scraped along the sidewalk like restless thoughts. Daniel noticed her without knowing why. Perhaps it was the color first, a soft, unmistakable yellow cutting through the city's usual palette of gray coats and black scarves. Or maybe it was the stillness of her, standing just off the curb near the crosswalk, as if she wasn't in a hurry at all. She wore a yellow coat that reached her knees, slightly oversized, the sleeves falling past her wrists. It looked warm, comfortable, intentional. Her dark hair spilled loose over her shoulders, catching the morning light, and when she smiled, Daniel realized this with a faint shock. She was smiling at nothing in particular. Not at a phone. Not at a passerby. Just smiling. The first morning, he thought nothing of it beyond a passing curiosity. New York was full of interesting faces. That was one of the reasons he loved it. He took his coffee and continued on. The second morning, she was there again. Same spot. Same yellow coat. Same soft smile. By the end of the week, Daniel found himself slowing his pace as he climbed the subway stairs, his eyes instinctively scanning the corner before his brain caught up. She was always there between 8:10 and 8:30. Never earlier. Never later. Rain or shine. Some mornings she looked thoughtful, her gaze lifted toward the buildings across the street. Other mornings she stared at the traffic, her expression unreadable. But the smile, gentle, warm, almost private, never fully left her face. Daniel didn't speak to her. He didn't even make eye contact at first. He just noticed. And somehow, noticing her became the best part of his day. He told himself it was silly. He was 34 years old, a data analyst for a healthcare firm, not a teenager with a crush on a stranger. But something about her presence softened the city. The noise felt less aggressive. The rush felt less urgent. For a few seconds each morning, the world slowed. On mornings when work loomed heavy, deadlines, meetings, performance reviews, he found himself looking forward to that brief glimpse of yellow like a reward for surviving the commute. One Tuesday, as November bled into December and the city dressed itself in holiday lights, Daniel arrived at the corner to find she wasn't there. The absence hit him harder than he expected. He slowed, scanning the sidewalk, then the opposite side of the street. Nothing. Just pedestrians, taxis, and a street vendor setting up his cart. A strange disappointment settled in his chest. He felt foolish for it. He crossed the street, bought his coffee, and walked on. But the morning felt dull, as if someone had turned the saturation down on the world. She was back the next day. Relief washed over him before he could stop it. He caught himself smiling back, though she wasn't looking at him. From then on, he wondered about her. Who was she waiting for? A lover? A friend? Did she work nearby? Why did she never look at her phone like everyone else? Why that coat, every single day? One morning, the wind cut especially sharp, and Daniel noticed her shiver. Without thinking, he slowed as he passed her, just slightly. Close enough to hear her breathing. Close enough to notice the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her hands curled into the sleeves of her coat. She looked tired. Not physically, something deeper. Like someone carrying a quiet weight. Their eyes met for the first time that morning. It was accidental. Brief. But it sent a small electric jolt through Daniel's chest. Her eyes were warm brown, expressive, curious. For a heartbeat, she looked surprised. Then her smile widened, as if she had been caught in a pleasant secret. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was softer than he expected. Daniel nearly missed the light. "Oh, good morning," he replied, stumbling over the words like they were foreign to him. The walk signal flashed, and the crowd surged forward, carrying him with it. He glanced back once, irrationally hoping she'd still be looking at him. She was. And she lifted her hand in a small, almost shy wave. Daniel spent the rest of the day distracted, replaying the moment over and over. Her voice. Her smile. The way she hadn't looked away first. The next morning, he arrived early. Too early. He stood by the subway entrance pretending to check his phone, feeling ridiculous. At 8:13, she appeared, walking toward the corner from the east, yellow coat bright against the gray morning. She took her usual place and smiled at the street. This time, Daniel didn't walk past. He stopped beside her, heart pounding louder than the traffic. "Hi," he said, before he could overthink it. "I was starting to think I imagined you." She turned toward him fully now, and her smile reached her eyes. "I was starting to wonder when you'd talk to me," she said. Daniel blinked. "You noticed me?" She laughed softly. "It's hard not to notice someone who looks at you like you're a sunrise." His face warmed. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Lena," she replied. "Nice to finally meet you." They stood there together as the city rushed past, two strangers sharing a pause in the middle of Manhattan. Daniel didn't know it yet, but that corner, her corner, was about to change everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the quiet reasons people show up to the same place every morning. And Lena, smiling in her yellow coat, was hiding a story far heavier than the city itself. Daniel spent the rest of that morning walking on air, though nothing about his day had actually changed. His office was still too cold, the fluorescent lights still too bright, and his inbox still overflowing with requests labeled urgent. Yet something inside him had shifted, as if a window had been cracked open in a long-sealed room. Lena. Her name replayed itself in his mind like a lyric he hadn't known he was waiting to hear. He caught himself smiling at his screen more than once, earning a puzzled glance from his cubicle neighbor. At 8:12 the next morning, Daniel stood at the corner before she arrived, hands shoved into his coat pockets, rehearsing imaginary conversations he hoped wouldn't be necessary. The city hummed around him, indifferent and relentless. She arrived at 8:16, right on time. "Good morning, Daniel," she said, her smile immediate and familiar in a way that startled him. "Good morning," he replied, surprised, and secretly thrilled, that she remembered his name. They stood side by side, watching the traffic crawl past. For a moment, neither spoke, but the silence felt comfortable, like a shared understanding rather than an awkward gap. "So," Daniel said finally, gesturing toward the bodega across the street, "I get coffee every morning. Would you like one?" Lena's eyes flicked toward the shop, then back to him. Something unreadable passed across her face, hesitation, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "That would be nice," she said. "Thank you." They waited for the light and crossed together. Inside the bodega, the warmth wrapped around them, carrying the smell of fresh bread and coffee grounds. Daniel ordered automatically, then paused. "What do you like?" She blinked, as if unused to being asked. "Just black. No sugar." He nodded and paid. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the counter while the barista filled the cups. Daniel became acutely aware of the small details, the faint citrus scent of her shampoo, the way her fingers drummed lightly against the counter, the way her yellow coat seemed to glow even under fluorescent lights. Outside, they returned to the corner, each holding a steaming cup. "This is kind of you," Lena said. "I don't usually accept things from strangers." "Good thing we're not strangers anymore," Daniel said, then winced internally at how cheesy it sounded. But Lena only smiled. They sipped their coffee in companionable quiet. Cars rushed by. Someone laughed loudly behind them. A bus hissed to a stop. "So," Daniel ventured, "do you come here every morning for a reason?" Or am I allowed to keep wondering? Lena chuckled, then looked straight ahead. You're allowed to wonder, she said. But not everything has an answer right away. He nodded, respecting the boundary. Fair enough. She glanced at him, studying his face as if committing it to memory. What about you? You walk past every morning like you're thinking very hard about something else. He laughed softly. I'm usually thinking about work. Or how I should have gone to bed earlier. Important thoughts, she teased. Extremely. The light changed, and people surged forward, but neither of them moved. I should probably go, Daniel said reluctantly. I don't want to be late. Lena nodded. Me too. He hesitated. Same time tomorrow. Her smile softened, something tender flickering beneath it. I'll be here. That evening, Daniel found himself thinking about her during dinner, during the news, during the mindless scrolling that usually filled his nights. He wondered what she did after she left the corner. Where she went. Who she went to. The next morning, it was raining. The city smelled like wet concrete and umbrellas bloomed across the sidewalks. Daniel arrived soaked at the edges, his shoes already regretting the day ahead. She was there. The yellow coat looked different in the rain, richer, deeper, like sunlight trapped in fabric. She stood without an umbrella, letting the drizzle dot her hair and coat. You're going to get sick, Daniel said as he approached. She shrugged lightly. I don't mind the rain. He pulled his umbrella over both of them without asking. She looked up, surprised, then laughed. See, he said. Prepared. They stood close now, sharing the small shelter. Daniel felt the heat of her arm against his through the fabric of their coats. Why yellow? He asked suddenly. If you don't mind me asking. Lena considered the question longer than he expected. It reminds me that not everything has to be gray, she said finally. Something in her voice made his chest tighten. They talked about small things that morning, favorite foods, bad subway experiences, movies they loved. She told him she liked old bookstores and quiet music. He told her about his sister in Brooklyn and his half-forgotten dream of learning the piano. But beneath every laugh, every easy exchange, Daniel sensed an undercurrent, a story she wasn't telling, a weight she carried with practiced grace. One morning, she arrived late. Daniel checked his watch twice, then a third time, an unfamiliar anxiety twisting in his stomach. At 8:29, just as he was about to give up hope, she appeared, breathless, eyes rimmed red. Hey, he said gently. Are you okay? She nodded too quickly. Yes. Just traffic. He didn't push. He never did. Instead, he held out her coffee, already bought. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it. Thank you, she whispered, like it meant more than the drink. That was the morning Daniel realized something important. He wasn't just enjoying her company. He cared. And whatever kept Lena coming back to that corner every morning, whatever shadow hid behind her bright yellow coat, was something that might eventually ask more of him than casual conversation and shared coffee. He just didn't know yet how willing he was to pay that price. By the third week of knowing Lena, Daniel had started measuring his days differently. Mornings were no longer something to endure on the way to a distant reward. They were the reward. He woke earlier without an alarm, his mind already drifting toward the corner at 77th and Lexington, toward the flash of yellow that now felt as essential as oxygen. He wondered when exactly that shift had happened, when a stranger had become the axis around which his mornings quietly revolved. That Tuesday, the city woke under a pale winter sun, the sky stretched thin and brittle above the buildings. Daniel arrived early, as he had begun doing more often, and waited near the subway stairs. He watched the commuters stream past, faces drawn and focused, everyone carrying their own invisible burdens. At 8:18, Lena appeared. She looked different. The yellow coat was still there, bright as ever, but her smile came slower, like something she had to reach for. Her steps lacked their usual lightness, and when she spotted Daniel, relief flickered across her face before she masked it. Hey, he said softly. Hey, she replied, her voice quieter than usual. They crossed the street together and ordered coffee. Daniel noticed she didn't make any jokes today. She barely touched her cup once they were back on the corner, her fingers wrapped around it as if for warmth, though the air wasn't particularly cold. You don't have to tell me anything, Daniel said carefully, but you seem somewhere else today. Lena smiled at that, not the bright smile that first caught his attention weeks ago, but something smaller. Rila. The city doesn't always ask for permission before being heavy, she said. Daniel nodded. That's true. For a while, They just watched the traffic. A delivery truck honked impatiently. Someone argued into their phone nearby. Life continued, indifferent to the quiet bubble forming between them. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said at last. "Anything. Why did you talk to me that first day?" The question surprised him. He thought for a moment, searching for honesty rather than charm. "Because you were smiling at nothing," he said. "And it felt like you knew something the rest of us didn't." She laughed softly, then looked away. "Sometimes I smile so I don't disappear." The words hung between them, fragile and heavy. Daniel felt an urge to reach for her hand, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "You don't seem invisible to me." She looked at him then, really looked, as if measuring the truth of that statement. "Thank you," she said quietly. That afternoon, Daniel found it harder than ever to focus. He replayed her words, "Sometimes I smile so I don't disappear," and wondered what kind of loneliness could make someone feel that way in a city of millions. The next morning, Lena wasn't alone. An older woman stood with her on the corner, bundled in a long gray coat, her hair tucked beneath a knit hat. They were talking softly, their heads close together. Daniel slowed as he approached, unsure whether to interrupt. Lena spotted him and straightened. "Daniel," she said. "This is Mrs. Alvarez." The woman smiled kindly. "You must be the young man with the coffee." Daniel blinked. Yes. Nice to meet you." "She's very punctual," Mrs. Alvarez added. "Always here before I am." Daniel glanced at Lena, confused. Lena offered a small shrug. Mrs. Alvarez checked her watch. "I should head inside. It's cold today." She squeezed Lena's arm before leaving, her expression lingering with concern. Daniel waited until she was out of earshot. "A friend of yours?" Lena hesitated. "A neighbor," she said. "She worries." "That's nice," he said. "Yes," Lena replied. "It is." They stood in silence again, the air between them thick with unspoken things. "Do you live nearby?" Daniel asked. "Close enough," she said. It wasn't an answer, not really, but he accepted it. Over the next few days, Daniel noticed more things. The way Lena's eyes followed certain faces in the crowd, lingering too long. The way she stiffened when ambulances passed, sirens slicing through the morning. The way she checked her watch more frequently now, as if waiting for something that never quite arrived. One morning, snow fell unexpectedly, soft and sudden, transforming the street into something almost magical. Lena laughed as flakes landed in her hair, and for a moment, the heaviness lifted. "This city looks kinder in snow," she said. "Everything does," Daniel replied. They stood close, shoulders brushing. For a second, it felt like something was about to happen, a confession, maybe, or a crossing of some invisible line. Instead, Lena stepped back. "I should go," she said quickly. "Everything okay?" She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her. "Yes. I just can't be late." She left without waiting for the light, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. Daniel watched her disappear, a knot forming in his chest. That night, he dreamed of the corner. In the dream, he arrived and waited, but Lena never came. The street grew emptier and emptier until he was alone, the yellow of her coat nowhere to be found. He woke with his heart racing. The next morning, he arrived early again. 8:10, 8:15. 8:20. No Lena. By 8:30, the knot in his chest had tightened into something close to fear. Just as he turned to leave, she appeared, running. "I'm sorry," she said breathlessly. "I didn't think I'd make it." He searched her face. "Lena, what are you waiting for every morning?" The question escaped before he could stop it. She froze. The city roared around them, uncaring. "I'm waiting," she said slowly, her voice barely audible, "for someone who doesn't know how to come back." Daniel felt his chest tighten. Before he could ask more, she forced a smile, the familiar one, bright, practiced, protective. "See you tomorrow," she said. And she walked away, leaving Daniel standing on the corner with the growing certainty that the city wasn't the only thing keeping secrets. Something was breaking. And he was already too close to step back. After that morning, the question Daniel had asked, "What are you waiting for every morning?" refused to loosen its grip on him. He replayed the way Lena had frozen, the split second where her carefully balanced world seemed to tilt. The answer she'd given was not an answer at all, more like a wound briefly uncovered before being bandaged again. Someone who doesn't know how to come back. The words echoed with a quiet finality that made his chest ache. The next day, Daniel arrived earlier than ever. The street corner was still waking up, the air sharp and clean, the light just beginning to creep between the buildings. He stood there alone, hands in his pockets, heart thrumming with a mixture of anticipation and worry. At 8:14, Lena appeared. She walked slower today, her shoulders slightly hunched, as though bracing against something unseen. When she saw Daniel, her expression softened, but there was caution in her eyes now, a new distance that hadn't been there before. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he replied. "I'm glad you're here." Her lips curved into a small smile. "So am I." They crossed for coffee in near silence. Daniel didn't push. He'd learned that Lena revealed herself in careful layers, and pulling too hard only made her retreat. Back on the corner, she finally spoke. "I didn't mean to worry you yesterday." "You didn't," he said gently. "I just noticed." She nodded. "You're good at that." They watched a man struggle with a stuck delivery cart. A woman rushed past, nearly colliding with a cyclist. Life, chaotic and indifferent. "Waiting has a shape," Lena said suddenly. "Did you know that?" Daniel turned to her. "What do you mean?" She lifted her cup, staring into the dark surface of the coffee. "It changes over time. At first, it's sharp. You feel every second pass. Then it dulls. Becomes routine. You learn how to carry it without letting it show." Daniel thought of her smile. The way it never quite left her face. "What happens after that?" he asked. She shrugged. "You stop expecting anything. You just show up." The words hit him harder than he expected. "Why show up at all, then?" he asked. Lena met his gaze. For a long moment, the noise of the city seemed to fade. "Because if I don't," she said quietly, "then it's really over." That night, Daniel barely slept. He found himself imagining scenarios he didn't like. The someone she waited for trapped in a life he couldn't escape from, lost, broken, or gone in ways that weren't easily named. He imagined Lena standing on that corner alone for years, smiling so she wouldn't disappear. By the end of the week, the routine shifted. Lena started arriving earlier. Sometimes she was already there when Daniel came up from the subway, standing with her hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes scanning the street. "You're early," he said one morning. "So are you," she replied. He smiled. "I guess we're both bad at waiting alone." She didn't deny it. On Friday, Daniel did something he'd been thinking about for days. "Do you want to sit somewhere?" he asked, gesturing toward a small cafe a few doors down. "Just for a few minutes." She hesitated, glancing instinctively toward the street. "I don't usually leave the corner," she said. "I know," he replied. "We can still see it from the window." Lena considered this, then nodded. "Okay, just for a little while." Inside, the cafe was warm and quiet, the windows fogged from the cold. They sat by the glass, the street corner visible outside, like an anchor. Daniel noticed how she relaxed slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "This is nice," she admitted. "I forget sometimes that it's allowed." "What is?" "To step away." They talked longer than usual, about childhood memories, favorite places in the city, the strange intimacy of sharing space with strangers every day. Lena told him she'd grown up in Queens, that she liked painting but hadn't done it in years. He told her about his parents' divorce, his tendency to stay where things felt familiar even when they stopped feeling good. When they left, the morning rush had thinned. At the corner, Lena paused. "Thank you," she said, "for not pushing. And for inviting me anyway." "Anytime," he replied. That afternoon, Daniel received an email he barely noticed. His company was restructuring. Positions would be reassessed. Nothing immediate, but uncertainty loomed. Normally, it would have consumed him. Instead, his thoughts went back to Lena. The next Monday, she didn't show up. 8:10, 8:15, 8:20. Daniel stood on the corner, heart pounding, scanning the crowd. Every flash of color made him look up, hope flaring and dimming in quick succession. At 8:27, she appeared, late again, face pale, eyes red-rimmed. "I almost didn't come," she said before he could speak. "Why?" he asked, unable to hide the fear in his voice. "Because it hurts more now," she admitted. Daniel took a breath. "Lena, you don't have to do this alone." She looked at him, something fragile cracking open behind her eyes. "I know," she said. "That's what scares me." The light changed. The city surged forward. And for the first time since he'd known her, Lena stayed on the corner long after the crowd moved on, as if deciding whether waiting had finally begun to cost her more than she could afford. Daniel stayed with her. Whatever was coming next, he knew one thing with painful clarity. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was part of the waiting now. By the time December deepened into its coldest days, the corner no longer felt like a coincidence. It felt like a promise, fragile, unspoken, but binding all the same. Daniel began bringing 2 coffees without asking. Lena began leaning into his presence without realizing it, her shoulder brushing his, her body angling slightly toward him as if he were a fixed point in the city's chaos. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. But something had shifted after that morning. She'd admitted it hurt more now. The truth, Daniel realized, was that it hurt more for him too. One Thursday, snow fell hard and fast, turning the sidewalks into slush and slowing the city to a crawl. Daniel arrived late, his train delayed, his boots soaked through. Panic clawed at his chest as he rushed toward the corner. She wasn't there. He checked his watch, 8:24. Still time. Still hope. At 8:31, just as he was about to give up and go back underground, he saw her. She stood across the street, half hidden beneath the awning of a closed shop, her yellow coat dusted white with snow. She wasn't smiling. Daniel crossed without waiting for the light. "Hey," he said, breathless. "You okay?" Lena looked up, startled, then relief washed over her face. "I didn't think you'd come today." "Why wouldn't I?" She hesitated. "Because sometimes people get tired of waiting." The words stung because they felt aimed at more than just the morning. "I'm here," he said simply. They stood in the snow, flakes settling in their hair and lashes, the city muffled and hushed. Lena's hands shook slightly. "Do you ever feel," she asked, "like staying is harder than leaving?" "All the time," Daniel replied. "But I've learned that leaving doesn't always make things lighter. Sometimes it just makes them lonelier." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. That night, Daniel's sister called. "You sound distracted lately," Emily said. "You okay?" He hesitated, then found himself telling her about Lena. Not everything, but enough. The girl in the yellow coat. The corner. The waiting. Emily was quiet for a moment. "Be careful," she said gently. "Not everyone who waits wants to be saved." "I don't want to save her," Daniel replied. "I just don't want her to be alone." "That might still change both of you," Emily said. He knew that. The next morning, Lena arrived with swollen eyes and a tight smile. "I didn't sleep," she admitted. "Do you want to talk about it?" Daniel asked. She shook her head. Not yet. He respected that, even though it cost him. They stood together, watching the street. An ambulance screamed past, sirens tearing through the air. Lena flinched violently, her coffee sloshing over the rim. "Hey," Daniel said, instinctively reaching out. His hand closed around hers. For a moment, she didn't pull away. Her hand was cold, her grip surprisingly tight. She stared at their joined hands as if startled by their existence. "I'm sorry," she said, starting to withdraw. "Don't be," he said quietly. "You're allowed." Something broke then, not loudly, but unmistakably. Tears welled in Lena's eyes, spilling over despite her efforts to stop them. She turned away, embarrassed, but Daniel didn't let go. "No one ever stays," she whispered. "They say they will, but they don't know what it costs." Daniel swallowed. "Tell me." She shook her head again, but this time it felt different, not a refusal, but a postponement. "Soon," she said. "I promise." The days that followed were heavier. Lena laughed less. She checked her watch more. Sometimes, Daniel caught her staring at the street with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Still, she came every morning. Still, she wore the yellow coat. One evening, Daniel found himself standing outside his office long after everyone had gone home, staring at his phone. He typed a message, deleted it, typed again. "Do you want to get dinner?" "Not near the corner. Somewhere else." The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "I don't know if I can," she replied. "That's okay," he wrote. "I just wanted to ask." There was a long pause. "Maybe this weekend," she finally said. "If nothing changes." Nothing changes. The words echoed ominously. Saturday came cold and gray. Daniel waited, phone in hand, heart in his throat. At noon, a message arrived. "I'm sorry. I can't today." No explanation. No rain check. Daniel stared at the screen, disappointment washing over him, but beneath it, understanding. That Monday, Lena arrived earlier than usual, already on the corner when he emerged from the subway. She looked smaller somehow, as if the coat no longer protected her as well. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said before he could speak. "I know," he replied. "I just wish you didn't feel like you had to choose between waiting and living." Her eyes filled again. "I don't know how to do both." Daniel took a breath, steadying himself. "Then let me help you learn," he said. She searched his face, fear and longing warring within her. "You might regret it," she warned. "Maybe," he said. "But I already regret every morning I imagine you standing here alone." The city roared around them, uncaring as ever. But on that corner, in the shadow of uncertainty and unspoken grief, something irreversible took shape. Lena didn't step away. She leaned closer. And for the first time since Daniel had known her, she let herself stay, not because she was waiting for someone else, but because someone had chosen to wait with her. The first thing Daniel noticed was that Lena stopped checking her watch. It wasn't immediate. It happened gradually, almost imperceptibly, like the way winter gives way to spring without ever announcing itself. One morning he realized she'd been talking for nearly 10 minutes without glancing at the street. Another day, an ambulance screamed past and she flinched, but she didn't retreat inward the way she used to. She stayed present. With him. That, somehow, felt heavier than the waiting ever had. They began walking a little after their time on the corner. Not far, just half a block sometimes to the cafe, sometimes nowhere at all. But the movement mattered. It was proof that her world was no longer bound to one fixed point. One Wednesday, after a long silence broken only by the hiss of buses and the crunch of salt underfoot, Lena spoke. "You asked me once what I'm waiting for." Daniel nodded. His pulse quickened. He didn't interrupt. "I don't think I can keep pretending you don't deserve the truth," she said. "Not after everything." He kept his voice steady. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she replied. "But I want to tell you." They stood by the curb. The city stretched endlessly in both directions. Her yellow coat fluttered slightly in the wind. "My brother's name was Matteo," she began. "Was." Daniel felt the word land like a stone. "He was older than me by 4 years. Loud, reckless, impossible to ignore. He used to walk me to school every morning, even when he was late himself. He said corners mattered, that if you met someone at the same place every day, you anchored them in the world." She smiled faintly at the memory. 2 years ago, Matteo disappeared. Daniel's breath caught. "Disappeared? How?" "Not officially," she said. "No police report. No missing persons posters. He just stopped coming home." She swallowed. "He struggled," Lena continued, "with things he didn't know how to name. Depression. Addiction. Anger. Some days he was the best person I knew. Other days, he vanished even when he was standing right in front of me." Daniel listened, every muscle taut. "One morning," she said, her voice trembling now, "he kissed my forehead and told me he'd meet me at this corner after my shift. He said he wanted to talk. He never came." The city noise surged, but Daniel barely heard it. "I came here the next day," Lena said. "And the next. And the next. At first, I thought he was late. Then I thought he was testing me. Then I thought," her voice broke, "I thought if I stopped coming, it meant I'd given up on him." Daniel felt his chest tighten painfully. "I wear yellow because he used to say he could always find me in a crowd," she whispered. "He said it was like carrying a piece of the sun." Daniel's eyes burned. "So you wait," he said quietly, "in case he comes back." She nodded. "Or in case he needs to know where to find me." They stood in silence, the truth settling between them, heavy and fragile. "I'm so sorry," Daniel said. "That's a terrible thing to carry alone." "I've been carrying it for 2 years," Lena replied. Waiting became safer than grieving. Daniel reached for her hand, not impulsively this time, but with intention. She let him. "What if he doesn't come back?" he asked gently. The question made her flinch, but she didn't pull away. "Then I'll have to learn how to live in a world where love doesn't always get closure," she said. "I don't know how to do that yet." "That doesn't mean you never will," Daniel said. She looked at him, eyes wet. "That's why you scare me." He smiled sadly. "Fair." That evening, Daniel walked home under a sky washed pink and gray. The city felt louder than usual, harsher. He thought of Matteo, someone he'd never met, yet now carried in his thoughts. Someone whose absence had shaped the woman he was falling for. The next morning, Lena arrived without the yellow coat. Daniel noticed instantly. She wore a soft gray one instead, her hands tucked into the pockets, her hair pulled back. Is everything okay? He asked carefully. Yes, she said. I just needed to see if I could. He nodded, understanding more than she'd said. They stood together. No yellow. No ritual. Just two people on a corner. After a minute, Lena exhaled shakily. I hate how relieved I feel. Relieved isn't betrayal, Daniel said. It's breathing. She smiled at that, really smiled. I'll still come, she said. Just, not because I'm afraid anymore. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. Days passed. Some mornings she wore yellow. Some mornings she didn't. Some mornings she cried quietly into her coffee. Some mornings she laughed at nothing at all. And Daniel stayed. One morning, as the sun climbed and the city surged forward, Lena squeezed his hand. Thank you, she said, for seeing me even when I was hiding. He looked at her, the woman who had turned a street corner into a crossroads of love and grief. You were never hiding, he said. You were surviving. She leaned into him then, just slightly, but enough. And Daniel knew that whatever happened next, whether Mateo came back or not, whether the waiting ended or simply changed, Lena was no longer standing alone. The weight she carried was still there. But now, it was shared. The first morning Lena didn't come to the corner, Daniel panicked. It was irrational, he knew that, but panic doesn't usually care about logic. He checked his watch again and again, the seconds slipping past with a cruelty that felt personal. 8:12, 8:18. 8:23. The corner remained empty of yellow, empty of gray, empty of her. He told himself she had warned him. I don't think I'll wait here forever. Still, the absence hit him harder than he expected, as if the city had quietly taken something back. At 8:27, his phone buzzed. I'm still coming, the message read. Just not there. Daniel frowned, then read the next line. Meet me at the cafe. Relief washed through him so suddenly he had to laugh at himself. He crossed the street quickly, nearly slipping on the salted pavement, and pushed open the cafe door. Lena sat by the window, coat draped over the chair beside her. No yellow. No gray. Just a soft cream sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked lighter. Not healed, Daniel knew better than to mistake that, but less anchored to one place. You scared me, he said as he slid into the seat across from her. She smiled apologetically. I figured I might. This is cruel and unusual punishment. I'll make it up to you, she said. Coffee's on me. They sat there watching the corner through the fogged glass. People passed without noticing anything missing. It feels strange, Lena admitted. Not standing out there. Like I left a part of myself behind. Or like you brought it inside where it's warmer, Daniel offered. She considered that. Maybe. Over the next week, their mornings continued to evolve. Some days they met at the corner, just as before. Some days they met inside the cafe. Once, Lena suggested a short walk instead, just a block or two, nothing ambitious. Daniel said yes without hesitation. They moved slowly, matching each other's pace, stopping when she needed to stop. The city no longer rushed them quite so aggressively. I used to think if I kept moving, I'd lose him, Lena said one morning as they walked. But I'm starting to think staying frozen was just another way of being afraid. That's allowed, Daniel said. Fear doesn't mean failure. She smiled at that. One evening, after weeks of tentative planning, Lena agreed to dinner. Not near the corner. Not near her old apartment. Somewhere neutral. They chose a small Italian place in the West Village, warm and dim, the kind of restaurant where conversations lingered between courses. Lena arrived early, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes darting nervously when Daniel walked in. You made it, he said, unable to hide his grin. So did you, she replied. We're both brave today. They talked easily at first, about food, about the music playing softly in the background, about the strange intimacy of choosing something from a menu together. Halfway through the meal, Lena grew quiet, pushing pasta around her plate. I keep waiting for something bad to happen, she admitted. Like I'm being punished for enjoying this. Daniel set his fork down. Joy isn't a betrayal. She looked at him, eyes searching. What if it feels like one anyway? Then we sit with that feeling, he said. We don't let it decide for us. She exhaled slowly, the tension easing from her shoulders. After dinner, they walked through the neighborhood, streetlights casting long shadows. When they reached her subway entrance, Lena stopped. This is farther than I've gone in a long time, she said. I know, Daniel replied. We can stop. She shook her head. I don't want to. She leaned in then, tentative, questioning. Daniel met her halfway. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, more promise than passion. When they pulled back, Lena laughed softly, tears in her eyes. I was so scared this would make me feel guilty, she said. But it doesn't. It doesn't have to, Daniel said. The next morning, Lena wore yellow again. But she didn't stand on the corner. She met Daniel halfway down the block, walking toward him with a smile that was no longer armor, no longer a plea to be seen. Good morning, she said. Good morning, he replied, his heart full in a way that felt earned rather than stolen. They walked together toward the cafe, the corner passing quietly behind them. Mateo was still missing. The grief was still real. The past still existed. But Lena was learning something new now. Waiting didn't have to mean standing still. And love, Daniel was discovering, wasn't about rescuing someone from their pain. It was about walking with them while they learned how to move again. Side by side. Forward. Hope, Daniel learned, was not a clean emotion. It didn't arrive in bright, uncomplicated bursts the way movies promised. It came edged with fear, with second-guessing, with the constant worry that it might be taken away the moment you leaned too hard on it. Loving Lena, really loving her, meant learning to live with those edges without letting them cut too deep. The call came on a Thursday morning. Daniel was already awake, coffee cooling on the counter, when his phone buzzed. Lena's name lit up the screen, and for a split second, his chest tightened with something like instinctive dread. Hey, he answered. What's wrong? She didn't respond right away. He heard breathing on the other end, fast, uneven. Daniel, she said finally. I need you. I'm on my way, he said without hesitation. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. When he reached her apartment, she opened the door before he could knock. Her eyes were wide, face pale, hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. They found someone, she said. Daniel's stomach dropped. Found. Mateo. No, she said quickly. I don't know. Maybe. Amun was brought into Bellevue last night. No ID. They called me because I'm still listed as an emergency contact. Her voice broke. They want me to come identify him. Daniel didn't think. He just stepped inside and wrapped his arms around her. She collapsed into him, the weight of 2 years crashing down all at once. I can't do this alone, she whispered. You won't, he said. I'm coming with you. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old air, the kind that clung to your clothes long after you left. Lena walked beside Daniel, her steps slow, as if moving too fast might make the moment real. At the nurse's station, Lena gave her name. The nurse nodded with practiced sympathy. We just need you to take a look, she said gently. They waited in plastic chairs under harsh lights. Daniel held Lena's hand, feeling the way her fingers clenched and unclenched, as if bracing for impact. I don't know what I want, Lena admitted softly. If it's him, everything changes. If it's not, nothing does. That's not true, Daniel said. Something always changes. They were led down a quiet hallway. The nurse stopped outside a curtained area. Take your time, she said. Lena froze. Daniel squeezed her hand. I'm right here. She nodded, then stepped forward. The moment stretched unbearably long. Daniel watched her face as she pulled the curtain aside, watched hope and terror collide in her eyes. She staggered back. It's not him, she said, her voice hollow. Relief and devastation twisted together in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. He caught her as her knees buckled, guiding her back into the chair. I thought, she started, then stopped. Tears spilled freely now. I thought I was ready. I'm not. Daniel knelt in front of her, ignoring the curious glances of passing staff. You don't have to be ready for everything at once, he said. This isn't a test you can fail. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, shaking. They left the hospital in silence. Outside, the city carried on as usual, cars honking, people rushing, life indifferent to the private earthquake that had just passed through them. Back at her apartment, Lena sat on the edge of the couch, staring at nothing. I hate myself for feeling relieved, she said. What kind of person feels relieved that someone else is lying in a hospital bed instead of their brother? A human one, Daniel said. A terrified one. She looked up at him. What if I've built my whole life around waiting for a moment that never comes? Daniel sat beside her. Then we start building something else. Slowly. Together. She leaned into him, exhausted. For a long time, they didn't speak. That evening, Lena did something Daniel didn't expect. She opened a small box from the back of her closet and placed it on the table between them. Inside were photographs, her and Mateo as kids, laughing, teenagers on a fire escape, adults standing on that very corner, her in yellow, him grinning beside her. "I've never shown these to anyone," she said. "Because if I shared them, it felt like admitting he was gone." Daniel picked one up carefully. "Sharing doesn't erase him." She nodded slowly. The next morning, Lena didn't go to the corner. Neither did Daniel. They stayed in, made coffee, let the city exist without them for once. It felt wrong and right at the same time. Later, as sunlight crept through the windows, Lena turned to him. "If he ever comes back," she said, "I don't want him to find me frozen in the same place." Daniel smiled gently. "He'll find you alive." She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. Hope, Daniel realized, wasn't about certainty. It was about choosing to move forward even when the past tugged hard at your heels. And Lena, bruised, brave, and still standing, was finally learning that hope could hurt and still be worth holding. Because this time, she wasn't holding it alone. Spring arrived quietly, as if New York didn't quite trust it yet. The snow melted into dark rivers along the curb. The air softened. Trees along Lexington pushed out cautious buds, testing whether the cold had truly loosened its grip. Daniel noticed the change most in Lena, how she stood a little straighter, how her laughter came easier, how the shadows beneath her eyes no longer looked permanent. They still met in the mornings, just not always in the same place. Sometimes it was the cafe. Sometimes a park bench a few blocks away. Sometimes just a walk that ended wherever the conversation did. The corner still existed, but it no longer owned them. One morning, Lena surprised him. "I went to Queens yesterday," she said as they walked. Daniel glanced at her. "To see your old place?" She nodded. "I thought it would hurt more than it did." "And it did hurt," she admitted. "But it also reminded me that I was someone before all of this." Daniel smiled. "You still are." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "I know," she said. "And that's new." That afternoon, Lena received an email she hadn't expected. It was from a community outreach program, one she had contacted months ago during a late night she barely remembered. They worked with families of missing persons, offering counseling, resources, support groups. They were starting a new group, and they asked if she wanted to join. Lena stared at the screen for a long time before showing Daniel. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she said. "Strength isn't about not breaking," Daniel replied. "It's about showing up anyway." She nodded, eyes wet. "That sounds familiar." The first meeting terrified her. She almost canceled twice, fingers hovering over her phone. Daniel didn't push. He simply said, "I'll wait outside." She went in alone. When she came back out, her eyes were red, but her face held something new. Relief. "They said his name out loud," she said quietly. Out loud, like it was allowed. Daniel squeezed her hand. In the weeks that followed, Lena began doing things she'd put on hold for years. She signed up for a painting class. She met a friend she'd slowly drifted away from. She laughed, really laughed, without immediately looking over her shoulder for guilt. But healing was not linear. One evening, as they cooked dinner together, Lena froze mid-motion, staring out the window. "I feel like I'm betraying him," she said. Daniel turned the stove down. "By living. By being happy," she whispered. He stepped closer. "Mateo loved you." That didn't stop when he disappeared. She leaned into him, letting the tears come. That night, she brought out the yellow coat. She laid it across the back of a chair, smoothing the fabric carefully. "I don't think I need to wear it every day anymore," she said. "But I don't want to get rid of it." "You don't have to," Daniel said. "It's part of your story." She nodded. "I think I want to choose when I wear it. Not let it choose me." One morning soon after, Lena walked with Daniel back to the corner for the first time in weeks. The street looked smaller than it used to. Ordinary. Just another intersection in a city full of them. She stood there quietly. "I thought this place was holding me together," she said. "But it turns out I was holding myself together the whole time." Daniel watched her with a mixture of pride and awe. "Ready to go?" he asked. She took one last look down the street, then nodded. "Yes." As they turned away, Lena reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote him a letter," she said. "Not to send. Just to say the things I never got to." Daniel didn't ask to read it. She tore the letter in half, then into quarters, then let the pieces fall into a nearby trash bin. "I love him," she said. "And I'm letting go of the waiting." Daniel felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with something like reverence. That night, as they lay side by side, Lena spoke into the quiet. "If he comes back someday," she said, "I want to tell him I didn't stop loving him. I just stopped standing still." Daniel kissed her forehead. "That takes courage," he said. She smiled, eyes closed. "I finally believe that." The city outside their window hummed, alive and restless, but inside, something had settled. Not an ending. A beginning, one built not on waiting for the past to return, but on choosing the present with open hands. And Daniel knew that whatever the future held, Lena had already done the bravest thing of all. She had let herself move forward, without erasing where she came from, without losing who she loved, and without standing alone. The city never noticed when stories ended. It kept moving, traffic flowing, trains rattling beneath the pavement, strangers brushing past one another without ever knowing what had once unfolded between the cracks of an ordinary morning. The corner at 77th and Lexington looked exactly the same as it always had. But Daniel knew better. So did Lena. They returned there on a Tuesday morning in late May, the air warm enough to promise summer. It wasn't part of a routine anymore. It wasn't an obligation. It was a choice. Lena wore the yellow coat, not because she needed to be found, but because she wanted to be seen. Daniel stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching the light change, the crowd surge forward and disperse again. For the first time, the corner felt small, not in a diminishing way, but in the way something meaningful feels once it's been held fully and then set down. "I used to think this place was sacred," Lena said quietly. "And now?" Daniel asked. "Now I think it was just a doorway," she replied. "I stayed too long in the frame." Daniel smiled. Doorways are tricky like that. They stood there in silence, not waiting for anyone, not searching the faces in the crowd. Just being. A man brushed past them, then stopped. "Excuse me," he said. "I just wanted to say, that color suits you." Lena laughed, surprised. "Thank you." The man walked on, unaware he'd just closed a circle he never knew existed. Daniel glanced at Lena. "See, yellow still works." "It does," she said. "Just differently." They crossed the street together and sat at the cafe window, the same one where so much had quietly changed. Coffee arrived. The city moved on. After a while, Lena reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I've been carrying this for a while," she said. "I wasn't sure when I'd be ready." Daniel didn't ask what it was. He waited. She opened it carefully and slid a photograph onto the table. It was her and Matteo at the corner, years ago. She was laughing. He had his arm thrown around her shoulders, grinning like the world hadn't taught him how to leave yet. "I'm keeping this one," she said. "Not as a marker. Just as a memory." She tucked it back into the envelope and placed it in her bag, then took Daniel's hand. "I don't need to come here anymore," she said. "But I don't regret that I did." Daniel squeezed her fingers. "You turned waiting into love." She smiled at him, eyes clear. "You turned noticing into staying." Later that day, they walked toward the subway together. Lena stopped at the top of the stairs, looking back once more. "Goodbye," she said, not with sadness, but with gratitude. They descended together. Months passed. Summer bloomed. The city grew louder, brighter. Daniel and Lena built a life that looked ordinary from the outside. Shared dinners, lazy Sundays, arguments about nothing and everything. Sometimes, when they passed that street, Lena would reach for Daniel's hand. Sometimes she wore yellow. Sometimes she didn't. One afternoon in early fall, Lena received a letter. No return address. Just her name, written in a familiar, uneven hand. Her heart raced as she opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "I'm sorry I didn't know how to come back." Lena sat down slowly, breath shaking. Daniel knelt in front of her, reading over her shoulder. "Is it?" She nodded, tears falling freely now. But this time, they weren't pulling her backward. "He's alive," she whispered. They didn't know where Matteo was, or where he'd been, or when, or if, he would come home. But Lena smiled through her tears. "He found me," she said. Daniel took her hands in his. "You didn't disappear." She laughed softly. Neither did he. That winter, on a bright, cold morning, Lena stood on a different corner, outside a small gallery in Brooklyn. Her paintings hung inside, splashes of yellow woven through each one like quiet signatures. Daniel stood beside her, proud and steady. As the doors opened and people began to enter, Lena squeezed his hand. "I'm not waiting anymore," she said. Daniel smiled. "You never were. You were learning." The city surged around them, indifferent as ever. But somewhere between a corner once ruled by grief and a life now built on choice, a story had been rewritten. Not erased. Not forgotten. Just finally allowed to move forward. And in the middle of Manhattan, on an ordinary street corner that no longer asked anything of her, the girl in the yellow coat became a woman who knew how to walk away, without leaving love behind.